another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble, and I am flying solo today. Chris is off on a hunting trip. It's hunting season. Some of you know that. I should have known that. I grew up, obviously, in rural Arizona, so hunting was a big deal. In fact, I remember, and this happened early in my school time, but they would let kids out of school for the opening day of deer season. That's how much hunting was a part of what the area I grew up in. Anyway, doubt that happens much anymore these days. Maybe in some places like Arkansas, where Chris is. Wisconsin, maybe. I know I did a deer hunt in Wisconsin many, many years ago. I did not see one deer. While I was hunting, I saw 30 deer on the drive from the hunting camp back to the airport. So, a little bit frustrating. Anyway, lots to cover today, so it'll be an exciting conversation. Obviously, the first thing we got to talk about is the debate. Last night was Wednesday, November 8th, and it was the third of the Republican presidential debates, down to 5 candidates. We had Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Christie. Now, one of the things that it struck me as I was watching the debate last night was that we had a pretty diverse field standing on that stage. Of the 5, you had a woman of color. Nikki Haley's of Indian descent. You had Vivek Ramaswamy, also Indian. You had Tim Scott, African American from South Carolina. And then obviously Ron DeSantis and Christie, 2 very white men. But of the 5, it's not bad. Pretty good diverse field. Now, as we've talked about before here at the show, none of them are going to be the next president of the United States. One of them might be the next vice president, or at least presidential candidate. Hard to say. I don't know where Trump's going to come down on this, because none of them had a lot of good things to say about Trump. The only person, and this again, Vivek is the one who is the most loving to Trump. When the moderator started the debate was saying, why you and not Trump? DeSantis had a pretty strong opening, but he kind of put all of his talking points out there at once. So he didn't have as much to say. Now, overall, DeSantis didn't have a bad night. He didn't have a standout night, but he didn't do anything that I think hurt him. Vivek went after Ronna McDaniel and blamed all of the election losses that we've seen over the last, and we'll get to Tuesday's election losses for Republicans after this. But he blamed it all on Ronna McDaniel back from 2017 forward. Never mentioned Trump. And so, he decided he was not going to compare himself to Trump. So, but Vivek definitely sees Nikki Haley as his biggest issue, or the one that he needs to take down. And I guess he's probably calculated that obviously she's a risk to him because she's polling better than him. But if he's assumed that he's not going to get the nomination, which I think he's smart enough to know, then he probably feels like he's doing the bidding of Trump by trying to take her down a notch. Now, what I think hurt him is that he came across very, very mean-spirited, and I think he definitely helped her more than he helped himself. Hurt himself, definitely helped her. None of the things that he attacked her on, I don't think stuck, and she had a good retort to most of that stuff. Had a pretty interesting. There's an interesting recap from the New York Times. 3 reporters who I have a lot of respect for Shane Goldmacher, Jonathan Swan, and Maggie Haberman, probably three of the best political reporters in the nation. Not a huge fan of the New York Times, but these three reporters happen to do a pretty decent job. They talked about Haley coming out swinging, and I believe, now it's interesting, you will get the sense from how they write this that they are viewing Haley as the best option against Trump, that they're doing what they can to prop her up a little bit, which, I get. But I actually think Haley probably had the best debate. Others have said DeSantis. I feel like this could be Tim Scott's last debate. I think he barely got onto the debate stage from the standpoint of polling, and I think the fundraising is a challenge. So I don't know if he'll be there for the next one in December. And I don't know that, even though I know that Chris Christie's not going to drop out of the campaign until at least after New Hampshire, because he's putting everything in New Hampshire, the purpose of Christie is kind of past. I mean, I think with Nikki Haley being as strong as she is against Trump, Chris Christie's purpose is passed, I believe. I thought he had some good lines, some good insight last night, but he is not a factor in this race at this point. They point out in their takeaways that DeSantis was playing it safe, and he did. He played it safe, but that didn't give him anything to write home about, so to speak. They didn't do a lot. They point out that there wasn't a lot of contrast with themselves and Trump. They were asked that at the beginning, but they didn't really get into like how I'm better than Trump, and the attacks on Trump just weren't there. So, and it's hard to debate someone who's not in the room. But this debate did get very personal, and Vivek was the one who made it personal, attacked Haley for allowing her daughter to be on TikTok, even though he's on TikTok. He was deflecting the criticism that Haley was putting towards him about being on TikTok by saying, "Oh, your daughter's on TikTok. You need to fix your family." And she's like, "Don't you mention your daughter, my daughter come out of your mouth. You're just a scum." And I thought that got pretty spicy. But Ramaswamy, in my mind, is a piece of shit. I just do not like the guy. I think he comes across as completely arrogant. He might be a smart guy, but man, read the room, dude. I mean, you're not doing anybody any favors, and especially yourself, because even as much as he thinks he's carrying the water for Trump, there's no way, there's zero chance that Trump picks this guy as his running mate. And I don't see him getting into the cabinet, but if Trump were to win, that I don't know. Obviously, the question on abortion had a lot of people, that was the big takeaway from the night before, Tuesday night. We'll get into that. But I think Nikki Haley's answer on that probably was the best place for the Republican candidates to be at this point. So, I don't know. It was the undercard, and it probably doesn't mean a lot. It was a little bit more interesting than previous debates in the sense that there was less interruption. I think the moderators were a little bit more forceful in keeping things under control. Ramaswamy, interestingly, went after NBC and the moderators at the outset, and saying why Democrats would never allow Greg Gutfeld to be a moderator at a debate. Why are we doing this? Well, Greg Gutfeld, good guy, not a mainstream, news anchor the way Lester Holt is. And so I think that's not really apples to apples in that regard. So let's get to Tuesday, which was Not a good night for Republicans. And this is interesting because I'm gonna juxtapose this with the poll that the New York Times, the Siena poll, New York Times poll that was out a few days before that, where it shows that Trump is leading Biden in these swing states. He's leading Biden in Arizona, in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and just barely losing to Biden in Wisconsin. And, you know, obviously there was a lot of panic amongst Democrats. David Axelrod himself was like, this isn't bedwetting, this is serious concern. And, you know, Biden has to make a decision whether he's doing this for the good of the country or for his own good, and basically called on Biden to step aside or to prepare to step aside. Now, you know, as listeners, that we have our own theory here, which is they're going to let the primary play itself out, and then they're going to replace Biden with, I believe they're going to replace Biden with Michelle Obama, because that is, if I were in the Democrat shoes, that's what I would do. Because I don't think anybody on the Republican side at this point could beat Michelle Obama in a general election next year. So we had this poll that was out, shows Trump winning in states where he lost to Biden last time. And then everyone's like, whoa, this changes everything. Well, then when Tuesday happens, and on Tuesday, Republicans got their ass kicked. There's just no clearer way to say it. It was not a good night. The only one which was not a surprise, was not obvious, the Republican in Mississippi won the governorship. No surprise there. But there was expectation that Cameron in Kentucky would beat Governor Beshear, the Democrat, but he did not. Beshear ended up winning again. And then you had Virginia, which had high expectations with Glenn Youngkin trying to get the House and the Senate as Republican, ends up losing both the House and the Senate. So now they're in Democrat control. So rather than having the trifecta, he's got nothing. And flushed down the drain were any aspirations that he had to jump into this presidential election because it did not go as well as they'd hoped in Virginia. Now, the Virginia loss, while not stunning, was hurting. It hurt because I think people had higher expectations. Because of Glenn Youngkin's victory as, you know, in the governor's race in 2021, I think there were some expectations that things would go better than they did. They were close, but it was still a loss. And, you know, I think it was somebody from, I'm trying to remember, it's Amy, and I'm trying to remember her last name, made the point on Twitter, I think, that she's with one of the, like, I don't know if she's with Sabato or one of the other prognosticators, but pointed out that the difference between crushing defeat and a landslide win is like between 1 and 3 points. So, which is really true. Now I have, speaking of Virginia, sticking with Virginia for a moment, Dave Rexroad, who used to be the executive director at the Republican Governors Association, is the chairman of Youngkin's PAC, Spirit of Virginia PAC, and he's a senior advisor to Youngkin. And he has a long text thread, or Twitter thread, X thread, I guess I should say, kind of reviewing the results from the legislative races in Virginia. Despite difficult odds from the outset and an onslaught of Democratic spending in excess of $50 million, Governor Youngkin's PAC contributed to these races in an unprecedented way, providing a roadmap for Republican success even in competitive or difficult environments. And pointed out that Republicans won 13 of the districts President Biden won in 2020. Republicans won 7 districts where the congressional Democratic candidate won in 2022. Well, okay, so that's not bad. I mean, they didn't get enough to get the majorities in the two houses. He points out that Republicans came 1,900 votes short in a district carried by President Biden and former Governor McAuliffe and Congresswoman Wexton from winning control of state Senate. So that is, they lost by 1,900 votes in a district that was heavily Democrat prior. Well, guess what? You lost. So I get the point, but a loss is a loss is a loss. And it would be a different story if it was a win. Now, he's pointing out, I think, fairly, that these are ways in which Republicans can compete in places that are blue. Now, here's the thing. Joe Biden is going to win, or Democrat, whether it's Joe Biden or Michelle Obama or whoever, is going to win Virginia next year. It's not going to be won by the Republicans. So it kind of, this all doesn't really matter, because an off year election versus a presidential election, a tremendous difference in the turnout. So these are lessons that can be looked at, but it's apples to oranges. It's not apples to apples on this. But, you know, one of the things that it's clear, and this is clear in Kentucky, it was clear in Virginia, it was clear in Ohio, where the abortion issue was on the ballot. Republicans got crushed on the fundraising. The Democrats outspent Republicans in almost all of these races. I think all of the races I just mentioned. I mean, in by factors of 2 to 1 in some cases. In Ohio, it was huge deficit. The pro-abortion side outspent the pro-life side significantly. And 57% of Ohioans voted to enshrine abortion as legal, basically under any circumstance, in Ohio. And this is a huge, huge problem, because now the pro-abortion side is 7 for 7 since Roe v. Wade. And I think that this is where the pro-life movement needs to do some self-examination and figure out what exactly they want to try to accomplish. Because if the goal is to save babies' lives, they are failing. And I'll point this out in the sense that since Roe v. Wade was overturned, abortions in the United States have increased by 100,000. There have been 100,000 more abortions since Roe v. Wade than the previous year. Now that's tragic. So something has gone very wrong. And, you know, the states are doing what they do. I think that that the pro-life movement is in a serious situation, because we spent 50 years saying this should be a states' rights issue, and the moment, literally the moment, that the decision came down, we had some in the pro-life movement saying, "Oh, well, we need a federal law to outlaw abortion," and it's just the cognitive dissonance that created was very confusing. And so, I mean, I think unfortunately, here's an interesting. Well, let me get to this. So, unfortunately, I think for Republicans to win, the abortion issue has to be put behind us. And what I mean by that is, as long as it's an issue, then it's going to help Democrats and hurt Republicans. I think that was the case in Virginia. A whole bunch of election ads were spent talking about the abortion issue. Youngkin really, laid down the marker. He said 15 weeks is the, consensus number. He was clearly wrong. That's not the way that the election turned out. Ohio shows that, even as radical as this language was for the Constitution in Ohio, they still lost big. The pro-life movement still lost big. This is a situation, this language says that parents don't have to be informed before their daughter gets an abortion. That's now in the Constitution in Ohio. So lots of challenging situations. Now, what I mean by the abortion issue has to be behind us, the way I look at it is in places like Ohio where this just passed as a constitutional amendment. So now that's no longer an issue because the people have spoken. So in the 2024 election, Ohio is going to go back to normal because they're people who, can't run against the candidates at the state level on the abortion issue. I suppose you could on the federal, saying that, they want to enshrine a federal control over that, which I don't know how that would work with the Supreme Court decision. But, I guess Congress could pass a law. But as Nikki Haley pointed out in the debate, you're going to have 60 votes in the Senate. You're never going to get 60 votes in the Senate on either direction. You're not going to get 60 to pass a pro-abortion legislation. You're not going to get 60 to pass pro-life legislation. So it's not going to be solved at the federal level anytime soon. So the states are going to play their stuff out. Now, the reason I say that if it's behind them, Republicans can do better in elections is if you look at New York on Tuesday. New York is very liberal on abortion. It's not an issue because you can get an abortion basically anytime. And we had some success, Republicans had success in city council races in New York because the issues about crime and the inflation and those things actually matter to the voters because they're not thinking about abortion. Abortion is not an issue because abortion is legal in New York. Now, I'm not saying that we should legalize abortion everywhere and it'll go away as an issue for Republicans. But what I'm saying is that in places where this is settled, it seems to me Republicans can campaign, on the issues that we actually succeed in. So I don't know what the answer is. We'll have to have some conversations. We may have some folks, leaders in the pro-life movement on the show so that we can actually have the conversation. Where do we go? Where do we go from here? As someone, I am pro-life, and it makes me sad that I look at what happened in Ohio. It wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. They got 57% of the vote. And so you had a lot of people. This is a state that Trump won by 8 points. So you've got a lot of people who are, at least seemingly on the right side, meaning right-leaning, that voted to enshrine this language in the Constitution. Now, maybe it was a turnout issue, and it's because it's an off year. We just didn't have good turnout on our side. I'll have to dig into that a little bit more, but we can have some folks on later to talk about that because I think that's an issue that's not going away, and it will be. I think it'll be playing a role in 2024. So as we look at what happened on election night 2 days ago, on Tuesday, and project that into 2024, I think Republicans have some real deep thinking they need to do about how they handle these issues because abortion is likely to be on the ballot here in Arizona. They're going to try to put a right to an abortion in the Constitution. My understanding is that they are getting ready to start collecting, if they haven't already started collecting signatures for that initiative. So that's going to be on the ballot. So, how do we campaign against that? It'll be interesting to see. So, I don't know. It's going to have some impact on all the elections up and down the ticket. Particularly, this is one in which it makes me worried about the state legislative races because we have such a thin majority. We only have a 1-seat majority in the House and the Senate here in Arizona. And so these issues can have some impact that could be negative for our future. All right, speaking of our future and negative impacts, as you know, we have on this show not been big fans of Matt Gaetz, who pulled the stunt on the motion to vacate and got rid of Kevin McCarthy. Then we went without a speaker for 3 weeks. And now we have Speaker Mike Johnson, who is facing some real challenges as we are hurtling towards the next government shutdown. We're 7 or 8 days away, and there is no path in sight. There's a lot of things being talked about, a lot of people chattering about, well, we've got this, what they call a ladder CR, which is, different levels of spending for different departments, that kind of thing. It's a little bit confusing. They're trying to get, through regular order on the appropriations bills. The problem is that even if they pass the House, they're going nowhere in the Senate. And the White House this morning said, we will not do Israel funding standalone. It has to include Ukraine aid as well. And as we all know, there's a bunch of Republicans who do not want to give any more money to Ukraine. Again, I'll say that I think the people who are pro-funding of Ukraine should do a better job of explaining that this is Lend-Lease, that this is money that will be paid back over time. I think that would have an impact on where the American people come down on this. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But it will be interesting to watch, because if Israel gets to the point where they are, I don't think they need aid at the moment. I think they're doing okay, but this is not going to be over anytime soon. I mean, they're in Gaza, rooting out the terrorists, and it's going to be long and arduous and deadly, and a lot of innocent lives are going to be lost on both sides. I mean, that's just the way Hamas works, is it puts innocent people at risk unnecessarily, because that's who they are. They're evil. And so Netanyahu is committed to getting the job done. And by getting the job done, I believe he wants to literally destroy Hamas completely. I don't know why we haven't sent assassins to Qatar to knock off the top leaders of Hamas, who are not even in Gaza. They're living the high life in a luxury hotel in Qatar. So bizarre. And yet people, I don't know. It seems to me that one of the great indicators of the viability, maybe viability might not be the right word, but of the righteousness of your cause is where the leadership is. I mean, you look at where Zelensky is. He's on the front lines in Ukraine, working his ass off to protect his country. The Hamas leadership are living in luxury conditions 1,000 miles away, directing things from afar. I mean, come on. This is insane. I don't understand it. So anyway, we've got our domestic issues with the spending, government shutdown coming, deals, having to be negotiated. We've got a Senate that's narrowly controlled by Democrats. Obviously, we have a Democrat president. We have a Republican House, barely. So this is going to get messy, and it'll be interesting to see how Speaker Johnson handles all this and how his conference reacts to the things that end up happening. So plenty to watch over the next week, 2 weeks, as we go into the Thanksgiving holiday, as we go into the Christmas holidays. There's lots of stuff that we will continue to talk about each week right here on Light Beer, Dark Money. So continue to listen in. But for now, have a good one. Take care.